The windshield wipers fought against the torrential downpour as James Wilson's luxury car glided through downtown. Through sheets of rain, his headlights caught a glimpse of something that made him brake suddenly. A young woman huddled beneath a store awning, two small figures pressed against her sides. Something about their silhouette against the stormy backdrop made his hand move to the window controls before his mind had fully processed why. Before we begin, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss daily stories of hope and transformation. Our story begins with James Wilson, a self-made tech entrepreneur who recently sold his startup for millions. Despite his financial success, something was missing in his life, something money couldn't buy. But fate works in mysterious ways, especially on rainy nights when the barriers between different worlds seem thinner. James rolled down his window, rain immediately spattering the leather interior of his Mercedes. The woman looked up, startled by the intrusion. Even in the dim light, he could see wariness in her eyes. "Excuse me?" James called over the drum of rain. "Do you and your children need some help?" The woman's arms tightened around the two small boys. "We're fine, thank you," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady and articulate. "Just waiting for the storm to pass." James noticed that despite her circumstances, there was a dignity in her posture, a protective grace in how she sheltered the children. Her clothes were worn but clean, her dark hair pulled back neatly despite the humidity. "I don't mean to intrude," James continued, "but this storm isn't letting up anytime soon according to the weather app. Can I at least give you a ride somewhere? Or buy you and your boys some dinner?" The woman hesitated, studying his face. The children, twin boys who looked about 5 years old, peered out from beneath her arms with curious, intelligent eyes. "Mommy, I'm hungry," one of them whispered, though loud enough for James to hear. Something flickered across the woman's face, that painful calculation every parent makes when their child's needs conflict with their pride. "I'm not looking for handouts," she finally said. "We don't need charity." James recognized that pride he'd worn it himself years ago. "It's not charity," he assured her. "Just one human helping another on a miserable night. I remember being caught in storms with nowhere to go. I'm James, by the way." A moment passed as rain continued to pour. Finally, she nodded slightly. "I'm Arlette. These are my sons, Jack and Caleb." 20 minutes later, they were seated in a booth at a nearby diner. The twins' eyes widened at the laminated menus with colorful pictures of pancakes and burgers. James noticed that Arlette ordered only coffee for herself while getting proper meals for her sons. "You should eat too," James said, gesturing to the menu. "I'm having a full dinner myself. Would be nice to have company." After a moment's hesitation, Arlette ordered the daily special. As the boys colored on the children's placemats with the crayons provided by their cheerful waitress, James observed Arlette more carefully. Her hands were slender with neatly trimmed nails, not what he expected from someone living on the streets. She spoke with an educated vocabulary, and there was an observant intelligence in her eyes that belied her current circumstances. "So," she said, meeting his gaze directly, "why would someone in a custom suit driving a car like that stop for someone like me?" James smiled. "Someone like you? You know what I mean. Most people pretend they don't see us, especially people with money." James considered her question. "Maybe because I remember what it was like before the custom suits. I grew up poor. Food stamps, second-hand clothes, the works." Surprise flickered across Arlette's face. "Hard to believe?" James asked. "No, just rare to meet someone who's traveled both roads." As their food arrived, James watched how Arlette cut the twins' pancakes into bite-sized portions, reminding them about table manners despite their obvious hunger. The boys were remarkably well-behaved, saying please and thank you to the waitress. "Your sons are wonderful," James commented. "Very polite." A flash of pride crossed Arlette's face. "Thank you. I try my best despite everything." "How did you—" James paused, unsure how to phrase his question delicately. "How did I end up homeless with 2 5-year-olds? Arlette finished for him. She took a deep breath. "I was in medical school when I got pregnant. Their father seemed supportive at first, but things changed after they were born. He became controlling, then abusive." She absently touched her collarbone, where James imagined bruises had once been. "I was 1 semester away from finishing when I had to leave in the middle of the night with nothing but what I could carry. The system, it's not built for people who fall between the cracks. No family to help, no completed degree, 2 children to care for." "You were in medical school?" James couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. Arlette nodded. "Pediatrics. I'd wanted to be a doctor since I was 12. Mommy fixes everyone," Caleb chimed in proudly, syrup at the corner of his mouth. "She made Mrs. Peterson's arm better when she fell." "Mrs. Peterson runs the convenience store where we sometimes shelter in the back room," Arlette explained. "She dislocated her shoulder, and I was able to help." Jack, the quieter of the twins, studied James with solemn eyes. "What do you do?" he asked suddenly. I make computer programs, James explained simply. Things that help people organize information. Like robots? Caleb asked excitedly. James laughed. Not quite robots, but maybe someday. As they continued eating, James's phone lit up with a notification. Arlette noticed him frown at the screen. Everything okay? She asked. James turned the phone over. Just a reminder about an event this weekend I'm not looking forward to. Work thing? Personal, actually. My ex-fiancée is getting married on Saturday. And you're attending? Arlette looked surprised. Claire left me 3 years ago when my company was struggling. Said she couldn't handle the uncertainty. Now she's marrying Bradley Reynolds. Of the Reynolds Hotel Group? Arlette asked. James raised an eyebrow. You know of them? I read, she said simply. When you spend time in libraries to stay warm, you pick things up. Well, yes, that Bradley Reynolds. Old money, guaranteed stability, everything I couldn't offer her then. James's jaw tightened. 2 months after we broke up, I secured my funding, and within a year, the company took off. I sold it last year for 8 figures. And now she's marrying her safe choice while you're wealthy after all, Arlette concluded. That must be complicated. The business world is small in this city. Declining the invitation would be noticed. James shrugged, trying to appear indifferent, though showing up alone while she parades her perfect new life isn't appealing either. Something changed in James's expression as he looked at Arlette and then at the twins, who were now quietly drawing on their placemats, ears still attuned to the adult conversation. What? Arlette asked, noticing his calculating gaze. I just had a rather unusual idea, James said slowly. After the boys had finished their ice cream desserts, James leaned forward. Arlette, I'd like to make you a proposition. She immediately stiffened. I'm not interested in anything inappropriate regardless of my situation. No, James quickly clarified, looking embarrassed. Nothing like that. I'm sorry if I gave that impression. He took a breath and continued. What if you and the boys accompanied me to Claire's wedding this weekend? Arlette stared at him. You can't be serious. I am, actually. Look, I'll be completely transparent about my initial motivation. Yes, there's a part of me that would enjoy showing up with a beautiful woman and 2 great kids after Claire left me because she didn't see a future with me. Arlette crossed her arms. So you want to use me and my children as props for your revenge fantasy? James winced. It sounds terrible when you put it that way, but there's more to it than that. He leaned forward. If you agree, I'll provide everything you need for the weekend. Appropriate clothes, accommodations at the resort, and afterward, enough money to secure an apartment, childcare, and support while you finish your medical degree. Arlette's eyes widened. That would be thousands of dollars. I know. And it would be yours with no strings attached, whether things go well at the wedding or not. Why would you do this? You don't even know me. James looked at the twins, now drowsy after their full meal. Maybe I recognize something in you that reminds me of myself years ago. One break, one person who believed in me, changed everything. Maybe this is my chance to pay it forward. Arlette studied him with those perceptive eyes. And what exactly would this arrangement entail? What would you expect from me? Just be yourself. Attend as my guest. That's it. I won't pretend to be your girlfriend or something I'm not. I wouldn't ask you to, James assured her. Just be yourself. That's more than enough. Arlette looked at her sons, considering what this could mean for their future. A chance to finish her degree, to provide stability, to fulfill the potential that circumstances had forced her to abandon. I need to think about it, she finally said. James nodded, writing his number on a napkin. Of course. Take your time. As they prepared to leave, James asked, Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? The rain's still coming down. We usually go to the shelter on 9th Street when it's like this, Arlette admitted. Let me get you a hotel room for tonight at least, James offered. No strings, no expectations, just a dry, safe place to sleep. Arlette hesitated, then looked at her tired boys. Just for tonight, she agreed. After settling them in a modest but clean hotel, James prepared to leave. Mr. James? Jack called suddenly from where he sat on the edge of the bed, his voice small but determined. Thank you for the pancakes. Something about the child's solemn gratitude touched James deeply. You're very welcome, Jack. Outside in the corridor, Arlette walked James to the elevator. Thank you for tonight, she said. Regardless of what I decide about your offer, I meant what I said, Arlette. You remind me of myself. All that potential, just waiting for the right opportunity. The next morning, James's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It's Arlette, came the voice when he answered. About your proposition. I've made my decision. There was a pause. The boys and I will accompany you to the wedding. That's great, James replied, surprised at his own relief. But I have conditions, Arlette continued firmly. First, we maintain honesty with everyone. I won't pretend to be in a relationship with you. Second, I want the promised support in writing, like a contract before we go anywhere. That's fair, James agreed immediately, and finally, her voice softened slightly. I need your word that my sons will be treated with respect, not used as accessories in whatever emotional game might be happening between you and your ex. You have my word, James promised, impressed by her priorities. The boys will be treated with nothing but respect. Then we have a deal, Arlette concluded. Perfect. I'll have my driver pick you up in an hour. We have some shopping to do. The luxury department store was like another world to Arlette and the twins. Their wide eyes took in the gleaming floors, elegant displays, and attentive staff who, to their credit, treated the obviously out-of-place family with professional courtesy after seeing them in James's company. This is unnecessary, Arlette whispered, as they were shown to a private shopping suite. We don't need designer clothes for this. The wedding is at Reynolds's flagship resort, James explained. Trust me, appropriate attire is necessary, but I've arranged for a stylist who understands the brief, elegant but authentic, nothing that would make you uncomfortable. The stylist, a woman named Maya with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, measured Arlette and the boys efficiently. We want you to look like your best self, Maya explained as she selected options, not like someone else entirely. For the twins, she chose adorable but comfortable suits, with bow ties they could remove if they became irritated. For Arlette, the selections were elegant, without being flashy clothes that highlighted her natural grace. You have beautiful bone structure, Maya commented, as Arlette tried on a simple navy dress that transformed her appearance not by disguising who she was, but by revealing what had been hidden beneath circumstances. When Arlette emerged from the dressing room, James was helping Caleb with his new shoes. He looked up and fell momentarily silent. Is it too much? Arlette asked, smoothing the fabric self-consciously. No, James said, finding his voice. You look perfect. Jack tugged at his little suit. Do I look handsome too? He asked seriously. James knelt to the boy's level. Very handsome, Jack. The most handsome gentleman in the room. Caleb twirled in his new outfit, eyes wide with excitement. Me too? Am I handsome? Absolutely, James assured him, straightening his bow tie. You both look exceptional. Arlette watched their interaction, something softening in her expression. Later, as they finalized their purchases, far more than just wedding attire, despite Arlette's protests, James handed her a folder. What's this? She asked. The agreement you requested. My lawyer drew it up this morning. It guarantees the financial support regardless of what happens this weekend. Arlette skimmed the document, eyes widening at the figure. James, this is far more than we discussed. It's what a medical education and proper living expenses cost, he said simply, plus a safety net. I want you to finish your degree without worrying about basic necessities. Arlette's eyes glistened. I don't know what to say. Say you'll sign it so we can continue with our day, James replied with a gentle smile. The boys still need haircuts, and we all need lunch. As Arlette signed the document with slightly trembling hands, she studied James's face. I misjudged you, I think. How so? I thought this was just about showing up your ex-fiancé, but you're getting nothing out of this that justifies this level of investment. James glanced at the twins, who were admiring their reflection in a mirror nearby. Maybe I get more out of it than you realize. Over the next 2 days, James arranged for Arlette and the twins to stay in a luxury hotel suite while final preparations were made for the wedding weekend. Though initially uncomfortable with the opulence, Arlette gradually adjusted, focusing on making the experience positive for her sons. Mommy, the bathtub has buttons, Caleb exclaimed that first evening, marveling at the jacuzzi jets. I know, sweetheart. Just don't press them all at once, she cautioned, though she couldn't help smiling at his excitement. James visited each evening, first on business pretexts, reviewing details for the weekend, bringing additional items they might need, but soon the pretense fell away, and it became clear he simply enjoyed their company. On the second evening, after the twins had finally exhausted themselves exploring every corner of the suite and fallen asleep in the bedroom, James and Arlette sat in the living area with cups of tea. They're remarkable children, James observed, so adaptable and well-mannered despite everything. Arlette smiled fondly. They've never known any different. I've tried to give them consistency even when our physical surroundings change. You've done an amazing job, James said sincerely. Most people would have broken under the pressure you faced. Arlette shrugged slightly. When it's not just about you, you find strength you didn't know you had. Their father, James began carefully, does he ever try to contact you? A shadow crossed Arlette's face. No, and that's for the best. Ryan was controlling. When I became pregnant, something changed in him. By the time the twins were 2, I knew we had to leave. She absently rubbed her wrist, where James imagined there had once been bruises. The hardest part wasn't even leaving. It was realizing that the system designed to help people like me is so broken. How so? James asked. Shelters with waiting lists, housing assistance programs that require addresses for correspondence, Childcare that costs more than you can earn without education, and education you can't complete without childcare. She sighed. I was nearly finished with medical school, just one semester away. Sometimes I still dream about it, putting on a white coat, helping children. And now you will, James reminded her. The agreement ensures that, yes, Arlette said softly. I still can't quite believe it. James hesitated, then asked, what will you tell the twins about this weekend? About why we're going to this wedding? The truth, in terms they can understand, that you're a friend who invited us to a special party, and that you're helping us find a new home afterward. Arlette met his eyes directly. I don't lie to my children, James, even when the truth is complicated. I respect that, he said. And what about the people at the wedding? What will you tell them about how we know each other? Again, a version of the truth, that we met recently, that you've been kind to us, that we're attending as your guests. She raised an eyebrow. Unless you had a different story in mind? No, that works perfectly. James sipped his tea. Claire will make her own assumptions anyway. Tell me about her, Arlette said. What should I expect? James considered the question. Claire comes from a wealthy family. She's beautiful, intelligent, and very aware of appearances. We met at a charity gala 5 years ago. I was just starting to make a name for myself in tech, and she was a trophy, I suppose, the perfect partner to have on my arm at events. You don't give yourself enough credit, Arlette observed. You must have had qualities beyond your potential wealth that attracted her. James smiled ruefully. Perhaps. We were happy for a while, or I thought we were. When my company hit a rough patch, when investors pulled out and I had to remortgage my condo, she stuck around for about 3 months before deciding she needed space. And then the company succeeded. Spectacularly, James confirmed. 6 months after she left, we secured major funding. A year later, our valuation was in the hundreds of millions. Did she try to come back? Arlette asked. There was one dinner, James admitted. She reached out, suggested we catch up. It became clear over appetizers that she'd heard about the company's turnaround. By dessert, she was reminiscing about our dreams together. But you didn't take her back. It was already too late. She was dating Bradley by then, keeping me as a backup option. James's expression hardened slightly. I'm not anyone's plan B. Arlette studied him. So this weekend is about showing her what she gave up. Initially, yes, James acknowledged. But now, he looked toward the bedroom where the twins slept. Now I'm finding I have different priorities. The following afternoon, as final preparations were made, James received a call from his friend Michael, who would also be attending the wedding. Just checking you're still coming tomorrow, Michael said. Word is Claire's been asking if you RSVP'd. I'll be there, James confirmed. With guests. Guests? You're bringing a date? Who? Her name is Arlette. She's bringing her twin sons. A pause. Wait, you're bringing a woman with kids to your ex's wedding? That's either brilliant or insane. Maybe a bit of both, James admitted. Where did you even meet this woman? You never mentioned dating someone with children. James hesitated. It's complicated, but they're important to me. After he hung up, James stood at the hotel window, looking out at the city skyline. He realized with some surprise that what had begun as a scheme had evolved into something he hadn't expected. He genuinely cared about what happened to Arlette and the twins beyond this weekend. When he arrived at their suite later, he found Arlette teaching the boys how to tie their shoes with their new dress loafers. Loop it like a bunny ear, she was saying patiently. Then the bunny runs around the tree and into his hole. I did it, Mommy, Caleb exclaimed, holding up his successfully tied shoe. Excellent job, she praised, then noticed James in the doorway. Oh, hello. We're just mastering some important gentleman skills. I see that, James replied, smiling at the domestic scene. Very impressive, Caleb. What about you, Jack? The quieter twin held up his own shoe with a small, proud smile. I did it too. Outstanding, James said. Every proper gentleman needs to know how to tie his shoes. Are you a proper gentleman? Jack asked seriously. James knelt to the boy's level. I try to be. A gentleman is someone who treats others with respect and kindness, who keeps his promises, and who always helps those who need it. Jack considered this definition solemnly. I think I want to be a gentleman too. You're already well on your way, James assured him. Later, as the boys watched a movie on the suite's large television, a rare treat that had them mesmerized, James and Arlette reviewed the final details for the wedding. The ceremony is at 4 o'clock tomorrow, James explained. We'll leave at 2 o'clock to drive to the resort. It's about an hour outside the city. Are you nervous? Arlette asked perceptively. James considered the question. Not in the way I expected to be, he admitted. I thought I'd be anxious about seeing Claire, about what she might think, but now I'm more concerned about making sure you and the boys are comfortable. We'll be fine, Arlette assured him. The boys are excited about their fancy clothes adventure, as Caleb calls it. James smiled, then grew more serious. Arlette, regardless of what happens tomorrow, I want you to know that meeting you and the twins has been unexpected in the best way possible. For us too, she replied softly. You've changed our lives already, James. Maybe we've changed each other's, he suggested. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of connection that had formed despite the unusual circumstances of their meeting. Jack's voice broke the moment. Mr. James, come watch with us. The fish is looking for his son. James smiled at Arlette. Duty calls. Indeed it does, she replied with a warm look that suggested she was seeing him in a new light. That night, after James had left and the twins were asleep, Arlette stood before the mirror in her hotel bathroom, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back. She was still herself. She hadn't changed fundamentally, but circumstances had stripped away so many layers of the person she once was. Now, paradoxically, in preparing to attend an event built on false pretenses, she felt more authentic than she had in years. James, meanwhile, found himself unable to sleep, his thoughts occupied not with tomorrow's confrontation with Claire, but with the genuine smiles of two small boys and the quiet strength of their mother. The Reynolds Grand Resort was a sprawling estate, nestled in the hills outside the city. As James's car approached the imposing gates, Arlette gazed out the window at the manicured gardens and stone fountains. It's like a castle in the stories we read, Caleb whispered, pressing his face against the window. It's very fancy, Jack agreed, his small fingers straightening his bow tie nervously. In the front seat, James caught Arlette's eye in the rearview mirror. Ready? He asked. She took a deep breath. As ready as we'll ever be. As they pulled up to the entrance, valets in crisp uniforms rushed forward to open doors. Arlette helped the twins out while James handed over his keys. Remember, Arlette whispered to her sons, best behavior today, just like we talked about. They nodded solemnly, eyes wide as they took in the grandeur around them. The resort lobby was awash in cream-colored roses and twinkling lights. A sign in elegant calligraphy directed guests to the Claire and Bradley wedding celebration. James offered Arlette his arm, which she took after a moment's hesitation. Each of her other hands held one of her sons. As they approached the event space, a young woman with a tablet greeted them. Names, please? James Wilson, he replied. And guests. The woman checked her list. Mr. Wilson, yes. We have you seated at table 7. Her eyes lingered curiously on Arlette and the twins. Thank you, James said smoothly, guiding them forward. The ceremony space was breathtaking, an open-air pavilion overlooking the resort's lake, with rows of white chairs and an archway dripping with orchids and roses. As they found seats near the back, better for quick exits if the twins became restless, heads turned to observe the new arrivals. People are staring, Arlette murmured. Let them, James replied quietly. You look beautiful, and the boys are the most handsome gentlemen here. His compliment brought a genuine smile to her face, easing some of her tension. A distinguished older couple approached, the woman embracing James warmly. James, darling, it's been too long, she said, kissing his cheek. Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Harrington, James greeted them. May I introduce Arlette and her sons, Jack and Caleb? Mrs. Harrington's carefully maintained smile faltered for just a second before recovering. How lovely to meet you all. James never mentioned he was seeing someone with children. Oh, we're not, Arlette began. We met recently, James interjected smoothly. Sometimes the most important people enter your life unexpectedly. Mr. Harrington bent slightly to address the twins. And how old are you young men? We're 5, Caleb answered promptly. We're twins, but I'm 3 minutes older. That's a very important 3 minutes, Mr. Harrington said seriously, making Caleb beam with pride. As the Harringtons moved away, whispering to each other, Arlette gave James a look. You didn't correct her assumption, she noted. I didn't confirm it either, James replied. People will think what they want regardless. More guests arrived, and with each introduction, the pattern repeated. Assumptions were made, eyebrows raised, and whispers followed in their wake. James remained composed through it all, a protective presence beside Arlette and the twins. I need to take the boys to the restroom, Arlette whispered after a while. Of course, James nodded. I'll wait here. As Arlette led the twins away, a man approached, slapping James on the shoulder. Wilson, you sly dog, Michael greeted him. When you said you were bringing a date with kids, I thought you were joking. Hello, Michael, James replied. And I never said she was my date. Michael raised an eyebrow. No, the whole room thinks otherwise. Word's already reached the bridal suite that you've arrived with a gorgeous woman and 2 mini Wilsons. James frowned. They're not my children, Michael, and I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't spread rumors. Hey, I'm just the messenger. Michael raised his hands defensively. But you should know. Claire asked about 6 people if it was true within minutes of you arriving. This information gave James pause. She did? Oh yeah, nearly sent one of her bridesmaids out to spy. Michael smirked. Mission accomplished, I'd say. Before James could respond, the wedding planner announced that all guests should take their seats, as the ceremony would begin shortly. Arlette returned with the twins just in time, both boys looking refreshed, and Jack's bow tie straightened once again. As the music began, and the bridal party proceeded down the aisle, James found himself paying little attention. Instead, he was aware of Jack's small hand occasionally brushing against his arm, of Caleb's excited whispers to his mother, of Arlette's profile as she watched the ceremony with a slightly wistful expression. Then the wedding march began, and all heads turned as Claire appeared at the end of the aisle on her father's arm. She was undeniably stunning in a custom designer gown that hugged her slender figure, her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate updo beneath a crystal-studded veil. Her eyes scanned the assembled guests as she proceeded forward, and when they landed on James, she faltered almost imperceptibly. Then her gaze shifted to Arlette beside him, to the small boys seated on his other side, and something flickered in her expression. Surprise followed swiftly by calculation. She's pretty, Caleb whispered, loudly enough for several nearby guests to smile. Shh, Arlette gently reminded him. Throughout the ceremony, James was aware of Claire's eyes occasionally drifting to their row during the readings and vows. Even as she pledged herself to Bradley, a tall, polished man who looked exactly like the sort of person who would inherit a hotel empire, her attention seemed divided. When the ceremony concluded and the newly married couple proceeded back down the aisle, Claire's steps slowed fractionally as they passed James's row. Her eyes met his directly, then deliberately shifted to Arlette and the twins, a question in them that James answered with nothing more than a small, enigmatic smile. As guests moved toward the cocktail reception, Arlette squeezed James's arm gently. "You okay?" she asked quietly. He realized with some surprise that he was. "Yes," he replied honestly. "Better than I expected." The reception was held in the resort's grand ballroom, transformed with cascading flowers and crystal chandeliers. Circular tables surrounded a dance floor, each setting gleaming with fine china and silver. James escorted Arlette and the twins to table 7, where they were joined by several of James's business associates and their partners. If they were surprised by his companions, they hid it well, engaging Arlette in conversation about the ceremony, while the twins marveled at the elaborate place settings. "So many forks," Jack whispered to James, looking concerned about making a mistake. "Just work from the outside in," James advised quietly, demonstrating with his own silverware. "And if you're ever unsure, just watch what I do." Jack nodded seriously, his small shoulders relaxing slightly at having a plan. Across the room, Claire and Bradley made their grand entrance as husband and wife, stopping at each table to greet guests. James noticed how Claire's gaze repeatedly drifted to their table between conversations. "I think your ex-fiancé is very curious about us," Arlette murmured. "Let her wonder," James replied, helping Caleb cut his chicken into manageable pieces. The gesture wasn't lost on Arlette, whose expression softened watching James's natural way with her son, nor was it lost on others observing from across the room. When Claire and Bradley finally made their way to table 7, the moment carried a palpable tension that even the twins seemed to sense, suddenly sitting straighter in their chairs. "James," Claire greeted, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I'm so glad you could come." "Congratulations, Claire," James replied evenly. "Bradley." He nodded to the groom, who returned the gesture somewhat stiffly. "May I introduce Arlette and her sons Jack and Caleb?" Claire's eyes swept over Arlette, taking in her simple elegance, before settling on the twins with obvious surprise. "How nice to meet you all. Congratulations on your marriage," Arlette offered politely. "Thank you," Claire replied, her tone suggesting she was trying to solve a puzzle. "And how do you know James?" Before Arlette could respond, Caleb chimed in. "Mr. James bought us pancakes when it was raining." A brief, awkward silence followed this innocent revelation. "Did he now?" Claire said, her voice honeyed but her eyes sharp. "How generous of him." "James has been very kind to us," Arlette stated simply, a quiet dignity in her voice that seemed to disarm Claire momentarily. "Well," Bradley interjected, clearly sensing tension, "we should continue greeting our guests. Enjoy the reception, James, and friends." As they moved away, James noticed Claire looking back over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "I don't think she knows what to make of us," Arlette observed quietly. "Good," James replied. That was exactly the point. But as he watched Arlette help Jack with his napkin, as he observed the gentle way she mothered her boys, even in this unfamiliar setting, James realized the point had shifted without his noticing. What had begun as a scheme to make Claire jealous had become something else entirely, a genuine appreciation for the woman beside him and the family unit she had created despite overwhelming odds. Throughout dinner, James found himself increasingly drawn into Arlette and the twins' world, helping with food, answering their whispered questions about the room's splendor, sharing gentle jokes that made them giggle. He was barely aware of Claire watching from the head table until Michael nudged him. "Your ex hasn't taken her eyes off you all night," he muttered. "Whatever game you're playing, it's working." But James realized he'd stopped keeping score. As dinner concluded and dancing began, the reception took on a more relaxed atmosphere. Arlette excused herself to take the twins to the restroom, leaving James briefly alone at the table. He was scrolling through emails on his phone when a familiar perfume announced Claire's presence before she spoke. "So this is your game?" she said, sliding into the chair beside him. "Bringing your new girlfriend and her kids to my wedding?" James looked up, tucking his phone away. "Hello, Claire. Enjoying your reception?" "Don't deflect," she persisted, her voice low but intense. "How convenient that she comes with a ready-made family. How long have you known her? A month? 2? "Arlette isn't a game," James responded coolly, "and those children are worth 10 of you." Claire blinked, clearly not expecting such direct criticism. "My God, James, you actually care about them, don't you? That's unexpected." "Why? Because I wasn't interested in starting a family when we were together?" "Precisely." Claire leaned closer. "You were always so focused on your company, on building your empire. Children later, you'd say, after we've established ourselves. People change, Claire. Priorities shift. In 3 years, she challenged, and suddenly you're playing daddy to someone else's kids?" James felt a flare of anger. "You don't know anything about them or about me anymore. I know you, James Wilson, better than you think." Claire's voice softened, her hand moving to rest on his arm. "This doesn't suit you. The instant family, the woman with the complicated backstory. You're meant for something cleaner." James looked pointedly at her hand until she withdrew it. "Cleaner? You mean someone who wouldn't complicate your perfect life narrative? Someone who would wait patiently while you pursued your ambitions but had no significant needs of her own? That's not fair," Claire protested. "No, what's not fair is abandoning someone the moment things get difficult, then attempting to slither back when the tide turns," James replied evenly. "You made your choice 3 years ago, Claire. I've made mine now. And your choice is a homeless woman with twins?" Claire hissed, dropping all pretense of civility. James stared at her, momentarily speechless. "How did you—" "Please," Claire scoffed. "Bradley's family owns half the properties in this city. It took one text to have someone run a background check. Arlette Mendez, formerly a medical student, currently with no fixed address. Her children's birth certificates don't even list a father." The calculated cruelty of Claire's investigation struck James like a physical blow. "You had her investigated? During your own wedding reception? I was curious about the woman who somehow managed to sink her claws into you so quickly." James stood abruptly. "This conversation is over." "James, wait." Claire caught his arm. "I'm trying to help you. She's obviously using you." "The way you tried to use me when you heard my company had succeeded," James countered. "The way you're using Bradley for his family's money and status?" Color flooded Claire's cheeks. "That's completely different." "You're right," James agreed, "because Arlette has never pretended to be anything she's not. Her worth isn't tied to her bank account or her address. She's raising 2 extraordinary children under impossible circumstances with more dignity than you've shown in your entire privileged life." Before Claire could respond, Bradley appeared at her side, his expression making it clear he'd overheard at least part of their exchange. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his voice carrying a warning edge. Claire quickly composed herself. "Of course, darling. Just catching up with an old friend." Bradley's eyes moved between them skeptically. "The photographer wants some shots of us with the cake before we cut it." "Of course." Claire smiled brightly, though her eyes remained cold as she looked at James. "Duty calls." As they walked away, James noticed Bradley's posture was stiff, his hand barely touching Claire's back as he guided her toward the cake display. Across the room, Arlette had returned with the twins and was speaking with an older couple James recognized as Dr. Martin, a renowned cardiac surgeon, and his wife. Approaching them, James caught the tail end of their conversation. "Finished all but my final rotation," Arlette was saying. "Pediatrics was always my passion." "That's a terrible shame," Dr. Martin replied. "The medical community needs more people with genuine vocations, especially in pediatrics." "Ah, James," Mrs. Martin greeted him. "Your friend was just telling us about her medical training. Did you know she was top of her class at Westlake Medical?" "I did," James replied, resting his hand lightly on Arlette's shoulder. "Her knowledge is impressive." "Mommy knows everything about medicine," Caleb declared proudly. "She fixed my arm when it got hurt really bad." "Did she now?" Dr. Martin asked kindly. "I just said a simple fracture," Arlette explained. "We were between healthcare options at the time." Understanding dawned in Dr. Martin's eyes. but rather than pitying or judgmental, his gaze was respectful. Resourcefulness is an essential quality in medicine. Many doctors with state-of-the-art equipment at their disposal lack the practical skills to handle emergency situations. The conversation continued, with Dr. Martin growing increasingly impressed by Arlette's knowledge and practical experience. By the time they moved on to greet other guests, he had given Arlette his card. The residency program at Metro always needs exceptional candidates, he told her. When you're ready to complete your training, call my office directly. Arlette stared at the card in her hand as if it were gold. Thank you, Dr. Martin. I will. James watched the exchange with satisfaction. See, the universe works in mysterious ways sometimes. The universe had some help, Arlette replied, glancing at him gratefully. As the evening progressed, the twins began to tire despite their excitement. Jack leaned against James's side while Caleb struggled to keep his eyes open in Arlette's lap. Perhaps we should think about heading back soon, Arlette suggested softly. They've been so good, but it's well past their bedtime. James nodded, feeling Jack's weight grow heavier against him. I'll get the car brought around. As James made arrangements with the valet, he was aware of Claire watching him from across the room, her expression unreadable as she observed his careful interaction with the sleepy child. While waiting for the car, James carried a now sleeping Jack, while Arlette held Caleb, who was fighting to keep his eyes open. They stood in a quiet corner of the lobby, away from the music and chatter of the reception. They've been amazing today, James said softly, looking down at Jack's peaceful face against his shoulder. So well behaved in a challenging environment. They've had to adapt to many environments, Arlette replied. But yes, they were especially good today. I think they wanted to impress you. This simple statement touched James deeply. Well, mission accomplished. From across the lobby, he noticed Claire speaking with her mother, both women glancing in their direction periodically. Then Claire excused herself and approached them, her expression carefully controlled. Leaving so soon? She asked, her voice honeyed with false concern. The boys are tired, Arlette explained simply. It's been a long day for them. Claire's eyes swept over the sleeping children, something unidentifiable flickering in her expression. Yes, I suppose children do limit one's social options. James felt himself stiffen at the passive-aggressive comment, but Arlette merely smiled. They don't limit anything important, she replied calmly. They just help clarify what matters. Claire's perfect composure wavered slightly. How philosophical of you. She turned to James. I'm surprised you're leaving early. You always loved being the last one at the party. Priorities change, James said, unconsciously tightening his protective hold on Jack. So it seems. Claire's gaze lingered on his hand, cradling the boy's head. Bradley and I will be leaving for our honeymoon tomorrow. 2 weeks in the Maldives. We have a private villa with its own staff. Sounds lovely, Arlette offered. I hope you enjoy it. Oh, we will. Claire's smile didn't reach her eyes. Bradley knows how to ensure I have everything I want. The implication wasn't lost on James. Before he could respond, Bradley appeared, his expression tightening when he saw them together. Claire, he said, a warning note in his voice. Your father is looking for you. It's almost time for the father-daughter dance. Of course, darling, she replied sweetly. I was just saying goodbye to James and his friends. Bradley's eyes moved to James and the sleeping child in his arms, then to Arlette and Caleb. Something in his expression shifted, not quite warmth, but a certain recognition. Your sons are very well behaved, he said to Arlette, his tone genuine. Not many children could handle a formal event like this so gracefully. Thank you, Arlette replied, surprised by the unexpected compliment. Bradley turned to James. I appreciate you coming today. I know it must have been complicated. The simple acknowledgement of the situation's awkwardness was unexpectedly decent of him. James nodded. Congratulations again. As Bradley guided Claire away, they could hear her hissing. What was that about? What was what about? Bradley replied, irritation evident in his voice. Being polite to guests at our wedding? You don't need to compliment his charity case and her brats, Claire muttered, not realizing her voice carried in the marble lobby. Bradley stopped walking, turning to face his new wife with shock. Charity case? Is that how you see people who aren't born into privilege? Their argument continued in heated whispers as they moved back toward the reception, but the damage was done. Arlette had heard Claire's cruel dismissal clearly. I'm sorry, James said quietly. That was unforgivable of her. To his surprise, Arlette seemed more thoughtful than hurt. You know what's strange? A week ago those words would have devastated me. Now they just make me sad for her. Sad for Claire? James asked, confused. Yes. Imagine moving through the world with so little empathy, so little understanding of human struggle. Imagine having everything and still being so empty. Arlette shifted Caleb in her arms as the valet approached to inform them their car was ready. In some ways, my boys and I have been richer all along. As they settled the sleeping twins in the back seat, securing them carefully with seat belts, James was struck by Arlette's perspective, her ability to find compassion Even for someone who had shown her none, it was yet another quality that drew him to her, another facet of her character that impressed him. On the drive back to the hotel, with the twins asleep in the back seat, Arlette gazed out at the night landscape. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "Not just for what it means for our future, but for treating my sons with such respect and care." "They make it easy," James replied truthfully. "They're extraordinary children." "They've grown attached to you," Arlette cautioned. "Especially Jack. I hope when this weekend is over, you might still want to see them occasionally." The vulnerability in her request made James glance over at her. "Arlette, I hope you know that my commitment doesn't end when the weekend does. I meant what I promised about supporting your education and housing, but more than that." He hesitated, finding himself in unfamiliar emotional territory. "I care about what happens to all of you." The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to explore fully. Back at the hotel, they carefully transferred the sleeping twins to their beds. James helped remove their small dress shoes, while Arlette gently loosened their bow ties and suit jackets. "They look like little angels when they sleep," James whispered, watching their peaceful faces. "Don't be fooled," Arlette replied with a soft laugh. "They're still capable of turning into little tornadoes when awake." In the suite's living area, they both collapsed onto the sofa, the emotional and physical toll of the day catching up with them. "What a day," Arlette sighed, closing her eyes briefly. "A successful one, I think," James observed. "The twins were perfect. You impressed everyone you spoke with. And Claire," he trailed off. "And Claire showed her true colors," Arlette finished for him. "Though I feel sorry for her new husband. He seemed decent enough. Bradley comes from old money, but he's actually worked for his position in the family business," James acknowledged. "I never disliked him personally. He just happened to be engaged to someone I once cared about." "Once?" Arlette asked perceptively. James considered the question. "Seeing Claire today, hearing how she spoke about you and the boys, I realized I've been holding on to the idea of someone who doesn't actually exist. The Claire I thought I loved was a projection, a carefully maintained image. The real Claire is the woman who investigated you during her own wedding reception and called your children brats." "That must be disappointing," Arlette said gently. "Surprisingly, it feels more like relief," James admitted. "Like setting down a heavy weight I didn't realize I was carrying." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the atmosphere between them. James found himself noticing details he'd been too preoccupied to fully appreciate before. The curve of Arlette's cheek in the soft lamplight, the quiet intelligence in her eyes, the strength evident in her slender hands. "James," she began hesitantly, "today at the wedding, everyone assumed we were together, a couple." "Yes," he acknowledged. "I should have corrected them more clearly. I'm sorry if that made you uncomfortable." "It didn't," she admitted, surprising them both. "What made me uncomfortable was realizing that I didn't mind the assumption." James held her gaze, his heart suddenly beating faster. "Arlette, I know this started as something else," she continued quickly. "A business arrangement essentially, but somewhere along the way it's become," she struggled to find the right words. "More complicated?" James suggested. "Yes." She looked down at her hands. "The boys and I have been alone for so long. I've had to be everything for them. Both parents, provider, protector. Today, watching you with them, seeing how naturally you care for them, it made me realize how much we've been missing." James reached out, taking her hand in his. "I've been missing things too. Success, wealth, achievement. They're hollow without someone to share them with. Someone real, not someone who only values the trappings of success." "We barely know each other," Arlette reminded him, though she didn't pull her hand away. "We know the important things," James countered. "I know you're brilliant, resilient, and devoted to your children. You know I'm trying to be better than my past, trying to find meaning beyond material success." "And what happens next?" she asked softly. "After this weekend? That depends," James replied. "On what you want, on what feels right for you and the boys." Before Arlette could answer, a small voice interrupted from the bedroom doorway. "Mommy?" Jack stood there in his rumpled suit, his hair tousled from sleep. "I had a bad dream." Arlette immediately went to him, kneeling to his level. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe." "I dreamed we had to leave again," Jack whispered, his lower lip trembling, "like we left before when Daddy got angry." Arlette pulled him close. "That's not going to happen, Jack. We're safe now." "Promise?" he asked in a small voice. "I promise," she assured him. James watched from a distance, his heart aching for what this small family had endured. Jack looked over his mother's shoulder, his eyes finding James. "Mr. James, will you stay too?" he asked, the innocent question loaded with more meaning than the child could understand. James approached carefully, kneeling beside them. "I'm not going anywhere, Jack," he promised. "You can count on that." The child's small nod of acceptance, the trust in his eyes, felt to James like both a gift and a sacred responsibility. Back at the Reynolds Grand Resort, the wedding reception was in full swing. Champagne flowed freely, guests danced under crystal chandeliers, and Claire moved through the crowd like a queen holding court, accepting congratulations and compliments on what everyone declared was the wedding of the season. But beneath her perfect smile, Claire simmered with unresolved emotions. Every time she glanced at the now empty table 7, she remembered James holding that child with such natural care, remembered the way he looked at Arlette with genuine appreciation, rather than the calculated admiration he'd once directed at Claire herself. "You're distracted," Bradley observed, appearing at her side with fresh champagne. "Don't be ridiculous," Claire replied, accepting the glass. "I'm simply being a proper hostess, making sure everyone is enjoying themselves." Bradley hummed noncommittally. "You've mentioned James's new girlfriend at least 6 times since they left." "I have not," Claire protested. "I merely commented on how inappropriate it was to bring children to an adults-only reception." "The invitation didn't specify adults only," Bradley pointed out, "and those boys were better behaved than half our adult guests. The Harrison twins are currently doing shots from an ice sculpture." Claire followed his gaze to where 2 intoxicated groomsmen were indeed debasing a swan sculpture. "That's different. They're celebrating." Bradley studied his new wife carefully. "Are you really over him, Claire?" The question caught her off guard. "Over James? Of course I am. I married you, didn't I?" "Yes," Bradley agreed. "After his company went public and his net worth hit 8 figures. Claire's champagne glass froze midway to her lips. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." Bradley's voice remained even. "You left him when his company was struggling. You reconnected after it succeeded. You've spent our wedding reception more focused on him and his new relationship than on us." "That's absurd," Claire hissed. "I'm just surprised he would attach himself to someone so obviously using him." "Using him?" Bradley raised an eyebrow. "The way you tried to use both of us?" Claire's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I saw the text, Claire," Bradley said quietly. "The ones you sent James last year while we were already engaged. Missing what we had, wondering if we gave up too soon." Color drained from Claire's face. "You went through my phone?" "I didn't have to. He forwarded them to me," Bradley replied. "Said I deserved to know what kind of woman I was marrying." "And you still went through with the wedding?" Claire demanded, incredulous. "I believed you when you said it was a moment of cold feet, that it meant nothing." Bradley's expression hardened. "I'm beginning to think I was wrong." Claire opened her mouth to respond when her mother approached, oblivious to the tension. "Darling, it's time for the cake cutting. Everyone's waiting," she trilled, already pulling Claire toward the elaborate 5-tier masterpiece at the center of the room. With cameras pointed at them, Claire and Bradley performed the traditional cake cutting with practiced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. As they fed each other ceremonial bites, guests cooed and applauded, unaware of the fracture forming in the facade of marital bliss. After the cake was distributed, Claire found herself cornered by her new mother-in-law, Eleanor Reynolds, a formidable woman whose social standing in the city was unimpeachable. "Such a lovely wedding," Eleanor commented, her eyes sharp despite her pleasant tone. "Though I was surprised to see James Wilson in attendance. Isn't that rather unorthodox?" "James and I have remained civil," Claire replied smoothly. "The business world is too small for petty grievances." "Indeed." Eleanor sipped her champagne. "His companion seemed quite lovely. A doctor, I hear?" Claire's smile tightened. "Almost. She never finished her degree." "Ah, and those adorable children," Eleanor continued. "Not his," Claire interjected quickly. "Some woman he's helping out. James always did have a misguided savior complex." Eleanor's eyebrow arched slightly. "Is that so?" Dr. Martin seemed quite impressed with her. Mentioned something about offering her a position in the residency program at Metro. This news caught Claire off guard. "What? When did that happen?" "During the reception. George and I were standing right there." Eleanor studied Claire with increasing interest. The way she spoke about medicine, quite passionate and knowledgeable, hardly seemed like someone in need of saving, as you put it. Claire's composure slipped further as she processed this information. Arlette, the homeless woman with twins, the charity case, had somehow impressed Dr. Martin, one of the most respected physicians in the city, enough to offer her a career opportunity. Meanwhile, James had watched it happen, his quiet support evident in how he stood beside her. "Well," Claire managed finally, "I suppose everyone needs a hobby, even James." Eleanor's eyes narrowed at the dismissive comment. "My dear, compassion is hardly a hobby. But then, I suppose some people find it more challenging than others." The barely veiled criticism from her new mother-in-law stung. As Eleanor moved away to speak with other guests, Claire found herself increasingly agitated. She drained her champagne glass and immediately reached for another from a passing server. Across the room, she noticed Bradley deep in conversation with his father, both men glancing in her direction with serious expressions. The perfect evening she had planned for years, the social triumph that was supposed to secure her position among the city's elite, was unraveling before her eyes. When the band announced it was time for the bouquet toss, Claire went through the motions mechanically, barely registering which of her single friends caught the arrangement. Throughout the evening's traditions, she found her thoughts continually drifting to James. Not the James who had attended her wedding today, but the James she had known years ago, before success had changed him, before Arlette and her children had somehow transformed him into someone who looked at a homeless woman with more genuine admiration than he had ever directed at Claire herself. As the evening progressed and more champagne was consumed, Claire's control over her emotions weakened. When she overheard two of Bradley's cousins discussing James and his instant family, something inside her snapped. "They looked so natural together," one woman was saying. "The way he helped that little boy with his food, you could tell it wasn't for show." "I heard she was in medical school before some hardship," the other replied. "Such a shame, but she carried herself with such dignity." "Dignity?" Claire interrupted, startling both women. "Is that what we're calling it now?" "I'm sorry?" the first woman asked, confused. "She's homeless," Claire stated flatly. "He found her on the street somewhere. This whole thing is an act to make me jealous." The women exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Claire, perhaps you've had a bit too much champagne," one suggested gently. "I'm perfectly fine," Claire insisted, though her slightly slurred words suggested otherwise. "I just think it's ridiculous that everyone's fawning over some woman James picked up like a stray cat." "Claire." Bradley's voice came from behind her, his tone carrying a warning. "That's enough." She turned to find him standing there, his expression a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "What? It's the truth. Your cousins should know what kind of people were sitting at their table. The kind of people who were respectful, engaging guests," Bradley replied coldly. "Unlike my wife, who's currently embarrassing herself by gossiping about them." Claire's eyes widened at the public rebuke. Around them, conversations had quieted as guests became aware of the tension between the newlyweds. "You're defending them?" Claire demanded, her voice rising. "She's using him, Bradley. It's so obvious." "The only thing obvious right now is your obsession with your ex-fiancé," Bradley replied, his voice low but intense. "On our wedding day." The truth of his words hit Claire like a physical blow. For a moment, she stood speechless, aware of the many eyes watching them, of her carefully constructed image crumbling before hundreds of witnesses. "I think you need some air," Bradley continued, taking her elbow firmly. "Excuse us," he added to the growing circle of onlookers. As he guided her toward the terrace doors, Claire's humiliation turned to anger. She jerked her arm away from him. "Don't touch me like I'm some misbehaving child." "Then stop acting like one," Bradley hissed. "How dare you speak to me that way?" Claire responded, her voice rising again. "This is my wedding." "It's our wedding," Bradley corrected, "though I'm beginning to regret that fact." This pronouncement, spoken loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, caused a ripple of whispers to spread through the ballroom. Claire felt the weight of judging eyes, saw the phones discreetly raised to capture the unfolding drama. "You don't mean that," she said, suddenly fearful. "You're just angry." "Yes, I am angry," Bradley confirmed. "I'm angry that I just spent 6 figures on a wedding to a woman who's clearly still hung up on her ex. I'm angry that you've spent more time tonight obsessing over James Wilson than talking to me. And I'm absolutely furious that you would publicly mock a woman and her children simply because you're jealous." "I am not jealous," Claire protested too loudly. "Then what would you call it?" Bradley demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you made the biggest mistake of your life leaving him, and now you can't stand that he's found someone better." The brutal assessment, delivered in front of dozens of witnesses, pierced Claire's defenses completely. With tears threatening to spill from her eyes, she turned and fled toward the ladies' room, leaving stunned silence in her wake. Inside the opulent restroom, Claire locked herself in a stall and finally allowed the tears to fall. How had everything gone so wrong? This was supposed to be her triumph, marrying into the Reynolds family, solidifying her social position, showing James exactly what he had lost when his company faltered. Instead, James had shown up looking happier than she'd ever seen him, with a woman who, despite her circumstances, possessed a quiet dignity Claire could never achieve with all her designer clothes and family connections. And Bradley, her safety net, her guarantee of lifelong security, was now publicly questioning their marriage mere hours after the ceremony. A soft knock on the stall door interrupted her thoughts. "Claire?" It was her mother. "Darling, you need to pull yourself together. Everyone's waiting for the final dances." Claire wiped her eyes, smearing expensive makeup across her cheeks. "Tell them to go ahead without me." "Without the bride? Don't be ridiculous." Her mother's voice hardened. Whatever is happening between you and Bradley can be addressed privately later. Right now, you have a room full of important people waiting. I don't care, Claire responded, feeling suddenly, overwhelmingly tired. Well, you should, her mother snapped. The Reynolds family doesn't tolerate public scandals. If you want this marriage to last, you need to get out there and pretend everything is fine. The cold calculation in her mother's advice, so similar to Claire's own approach to life, suddenly struck her as profoundly sad. Had she ever made a decision based purely on emotion rather than advantage? Had she ever loved someone for who they were rather than what they represented? Slowly, Claire unlocked the stall door, facing her mother's critical gaze. Fix your makeup, her mother instructed. I'll tell them you'll be out in 5 minutes. Alone at the vanity, Claire stared at her reflection, the perfect bride with mascara-streaked cheeks and emptiness in her eyes. For the first time, she saw herself clearly, and the image was far from the one she had cultivated so carefully. At the hotel, morning sunlight filtered through the curtains of the suite where Arlette and the twins were staying. James had left late the previous night, after making sure Jack returned to sleep peacefully. Now, as Arlette prepared breakfast for her sons using the suite's kitchenette, a knock at the door announced his return. "Mr. James?" Caleb exclaimed, abandoning his cereal to rush to the door. "Good morning, gentlemen," James greeted them, carrying a bag from a local bakery. "I thought you might enjoy some fresh pastries." "What kind?" Jack asked, peering into the bag. "Several kinds," James replied with a smile. "I wasn't sure what you preferred." Arlette watched the interaction with a soft expression. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," James answered simply, setting the bag on the counter. "How did everyone sleep?" "Like rocks," Arlette replied. "No more bad dreams." As they enjoyed breakfast together, there was an easy familiarity between them that belied their short acquaintance. The twins chattered about the wedding, about the fancy hotel, about their plans for the day. James listened attentively, responding to their questions with the same seriousness he might give to business associates. "Oh, before I forget," James said, pulling out his phone, "you'll find this interesting. Check out the society page this morning." He handed the phone to Arlette, who scanned the headline. "Reynolds Harrington wedding ends in drama. Honeymoon canceled as groom questions marriage." "What?" Arlette's eyes widened as she read further. "The wedding was called off? After we left?" James nodded. "Not officially annulled yet, but according to my sources, Bradley spent the night in his parents' guest house, not the honeymoon suite, and they've definitely canceled their trip to the Maldives." "What happened after we left?" Arlette asked, keeping her voice low so the twins wouldn't overhear. "Apparently, Claire had a very public meltdown," James explained. "Made some comments about you that got back to Bradley, who then called her out for being obsessed with me on their wedding day." Arlette winced. I almost feel sorry for her. "From what I hear, she brought it on herself," James replied. "But yes, it's an unfortunate situation for everyone involved." "Does that make you feel, vindicated?" Arlette asked carefully. James considered the question. "Honestly, not really. There was a time when seeing Claire's perfect plan fall apart would have given me satisfaction. But now, it just seems sad." Arlette studied him. "You really have changed." "We all have," James responded, glancing at the twins who were now comparing which pastries had the most chocolate. After breakfast, while the boys were engrossed in a cartoon on the suite's television, James and Arlette sat at the small dining table, discussing next steps. "I've arranged for a real estate agent to show us some apartments tomorrow," James explained. 3-bedroom places near good schools and within reasonable distance of the medical center. "Us?" Arlette picked up on the pronoun immediately. James looked slightly embarrassed. "I meant you and the boys, of course, though I'd like to help with the selection, if that's okay." Arlette nodded slowly. "Of course, your insight would be valuable. I've also reached out to Dr. Martin," James continued. "He's expediting the paperwork for your readmission to the program. With your previous academic record, there should be no issues." "This is all happening so fast," Arlette said softly. "A week ago, we were sleeping in a shelter, and now you're on your way back to the life you were meant to have," James finished for her. "The one that was interrupted. Because of you," she added. "Because of your own merit," James corrected. "All I did was make a few introductions. Dr. Martin was impressed by you, not by me." Arlette reached across the table, taking his hand. "Thank you, James. Not just for the material help, but for seeing us, really seeing us, when most people looked away." The moment was interrupted by James's phone ringing. He checked the screen, his expression turning serious. "Excuse me, I should take this." While James took the call in the hallway, Arlette joined her sons on the sofa, her mind whirling with the rapid changes in their circumstances. When James returned several minutes later, his expression was difficult to read. "Everything okay?" she asked. "That was Bradley Reynolds," James said, sounding surprised himself. "Bradley? What did he want?" James sat beside them on the sofa. "To apologize, actually, for Claire's behavior yesterday. for things she apparently said after we left. That was unexpected, Arlette commented. There's more, James continued. He's starting a new healthcare initiative through the Reynolds Foundation, free clinics in underserved neighborhoods. He asked if you might be interested in consulting on the project, given your medical background and unique perspective on the gaps in the system. Arlette stared at him. Is he serious? Completely. It's a paid position, part-time to accommodate your studies. He was quite insistent that it has nothing to do with Claire or with me. He genuinely wants your input. That's, Arlette struggled to find words, a remarkable opportunity, James finished for her, and one you're uniquely qualified for. Jack, who had been listening with the selective attention of a 5-year-old, looked up at his mother. Are you going to be a doctor again, Mommy? Arlette smoothed his hair. I'm going to finish becoming a doctor, yes. And we get to stay in one place? He asked, the question revealing how deeply their unstable living situation had affected him. Yes, sweetheart, she assured him. We're going to have a home now. With Mr. James, too? Caleb chimed in innocently. The question hung in the air, loaded with more significance than the child could understand. James and Arlette exchanged looks, neither quite ready to define what was developing between them. Mr. James will be around, Arlette answered carefully. He's our friend. James nodded in agreement, though something in his expression suggested he hoped for more in time. Later, as they prepared to check out of the hotel and move temporarily into a corporate apartment James had arranged until they found permanent housing, Arlette received a text message that made her gasp. What is it? James asked, concerned. It's from Claire, Arlette said incredulously, showing him the screen. The message read, I owe you an apology for my behavior and comments yesterday. They were inexcusable. I would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you directly when you have time. Are you going to respond? James asked after reading it. Arlette considered the question. Yes, I think I will. Not for her sake, but for mine. Holding on to resentment isn't something I want to carry forward into our new life. James smiled. You continue to surprise me, Arlette Mendez. In good ways, I hope, she replied with a small smile. In the best ways, he assured her. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, Jack tugged on James's sleeve. Are we going to your house now? He asked. Not today, buddy, James explained gently. But I'll visit you at your new place, and sometimes you can come visit mine. Would that be okay? Jack nodded seriously, then surprised James by slipping his small hand into James's larger one as they walked toward the elevator. The simple gesture of trust affected James deeply, and he found himself squeezing the child's hand gently in response. In the lobby, as they checked out, the hotel manager approached them. Mr. Wilson, he greeted James. I have a message for you from Mr. Reynolds. James accepted the envelope curiously. Inside was a brief note and a business card. What does it say? Arlette asked as they walked toward the exit. Bradley wants to meet for lunch next week, James explained, puzzled, to discuss a potential collaboration between his hotel group and my new education technology startup. That's unexpected, Arlette observed. Very, James agreed, especially considering the circumstances. Outside, as the valet brought James's car around, Arlette looked up at the luxury hotel, then down at her sons in their regular clothes, the fancy wedding attire carefully packed away, and finally at James. A week ago, standing in the rain, I could never have imagined any of this, she said softly. Life can change in an instant, James replied, helping the twins into the back seat. Sometimes for the worse, but sometimes, he met her eyes, sometimes for the infinitely better. As they drove away from the hotel, leaving behind the drama of the wedding and stepping into the uncertain but promising future, Jack's small voice came from the back seat. Mr. James, are you going to be our new daddy? The innocent question caused James to meet Arlette's eyes briefly, a silent communication passing between them. That's a conversation for another day, Jack, Arlette answered gently. But Mr. James is going to be an important part of our lives. Is that okay with you? Both twins nodded enthusiastically, satisfied with this answer for now. James smiled, feeling something settle in his chest, a certainty that had been missing from his life, despite all his material success. Whatever label their relationship might eventually carry, he knew with absolute clarity that these three people had become essential to him in ways he hadn't thought possible when he first spotted them, huddled under that store awning in the rain. 2 months later, the transformation in all their lives was remarkable. Arlette had been readmitted to medical school, entering an accelerated program that would allow her to complete her degree within 18 months. The twins were enrolled in a good elementary school, thriving in the stability of their new environment. And James had found new purpose beyond his business success, establishing a foundation that provided support for single parents pursuing higher education. The apartment they had chosen was spacious, but not ostentatious, a 3-bedroom unit in a safe neighborhood with a small park nearby. Though it was technically Arlette's place, James spent so much time there that his toothbrush had a permanent spot in the bathroom. and the twins no longer announced his arrival with excitement, simply accepting his presence as a natural part of their routine. On a warm Saturday evening, James arrived carrying groceries, letting himself in with the key Arlette had given him for emergencies, though both knew it signified more. "We're in the kitchen," Arlette called. James found the twins seated at the counter, serious expressions on their faces as they helped prepare dinner. Jack was carefully tearing lettuce for a salad, while Caleb measured pasta into a pot, his tongue poking out in concentration. "I see I have some competition in the kitchen," James observed, setting his bags down. "We're helping Mommy make a celebration dinner," Caleb informed him. "A celebration? What are we celebrating?" James asked, catching Arlette's eye over the children's heads. She smiled, a hint of excitement in her expression. "I got my midterm results today, top marks in all subjects." "That's fantastic," James exclaimed, crossing to give her a congratulatory hug. Over the past 2 months, physical affection between them had evolved naturally, from hesitant touches to comfortable embraces that lingered just a bit longer each time. "Dr. Patel said I'm on track to graduate with honors if I maintain these grades," she added, the pride in her voice unmistakable. "I never doubted it for a second," James assured her. As they prepared dinner together, James taking over the sauce while Arlette supervised the twins' contributions, the ease between them felt like something that had always existed rather than a connection formed only months ago. During dinner, conversation flowed naturally, the twins eagerly sharing stories from school while James and Arlette listened attentively. There was laughter, gentle teasing, small moments of connection that had become the fabric of their shared life. "How's the foundation coming along?" Arlette asked as they cleared plates after the meal. James's face lit up. "We've approved our first 10 grants, single parents from various backgrounds, all pursuing education that was interrupted. One woman's story reminded me so much of yours. She was studying engineering when she had to leave an abusive relationship." "That's wonderful, James," Arlette said sincerely. "You're changing lives." "Just paying forward what life has given me," he replied, glancing meaningfully at her and the twins. After the kitchen was cleaned, they settled in the living room for what had become their Saturday tradition movie night with popcorn. The twins, now in pajamas, nestled between James and Arlette on the sofa as an animated film played on the television. Halfway through the movie, Jack looked up at James with those serious eyes that always seemed to see more than a 5-year-old should. "Can we stay with you forever?" he asked suddenly. The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. James glanced at Arlette, whose expression was a mixture of surprise and something softer, more vulnerable. "What do you mean, buddy?" James asked carefully. "Mommy says we have our forever home now," Jack explained. "But we want you in our forever home too." Caleb nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, like a real family. Boys," Arlette began gently, "Mr. James has his own home, but he visits us often, and I think it's a wonderful idea," James interrupted softly, his eyes meeting Arlette's over the children's heads. "You do?" Arlette asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do," James confirmed. If it's what you want, too." The twins looked between the adults, sensing the significance of the moment, even if they didn't fully understand it. "I think," Arlette said carefully, "that would be something we would need to discuss more." James nodded, respecting her measured response. Of course. The movie continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. A possibility had been voiced that had existed beneath the surface of their relationship for weeks now. Later, after the twins were tucked into bed with stories and goodnight kisses from both adults, James and Arlette sat on the balcony of the apartment, the city lights twinkling below them. "I'm sorry if Jack's question put you on the spot," Arlette said after a comfortable silence. "It didn't," James assured her. "If anything, it gave voice to something I've been thinking about for a while now." Arlette turned to face him. "You have?" James nodded, reaching for her hand. "Arlette, these past 2 months have been the happiest of my life. Not because of any business success or material gain, but because of you and the boys." "James," she began, her voice soft. "I know it's fast," he continued. "I know we came together under unusual circumstances, but I also know that what's grown between us is real. I care about you, all of you, more than I thought possible." "We care about you too," Arlette admitted. "The boys adore you and She hesitated. "And you?" James prompted gently. "I've never met anyone like you," she said. "If you enjoyed this true story, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Until next time.